and thinking about Veterans Day, as we talked about a bit this morning here at our church. Veterans Day is a time for us to think about all the people who have helped give us the freedom that we have in our country. Sometimes we're challenged with our country. We may not agree with everything that happens at any given moment. In fact, I imagine there's no one here who does. But living in the United States of America, I think, is an honor, and we have our veterans to thank for it, all of our veterans. We have a special guest tonight. Well, we want to think about all of our veterans. We thought, what might we do? And we have prevailed upon Mr. Mel Jacob to come and talk with us tonight.
Okay.
So, again, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. I feel like I have prevailed upon you now twice in the last few years. But hearing your story, it's an honor, just to sit with someone who served his country. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us about it. So I just wanted to start, as we did in the past, and ask you a few questions. So first of all, Mel, where were you born?
In Manitowoc, Wisconsin.
So right here in Wisconsin.
Yep.
And Manitowoc has a Navy history, we know. There's was it submarines that were built there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, and they still have submarines there now. So you were born in Manitowoc, and what happened after that?
Well, then during the Depression, we moved to Detroit so we could have a job. There was no jobs during the Depression in Manitowoc.
Okay. And what year were you born?
1926.
Okay, so 1926. You moved to Detroit then, and what did your family do? What type of work did your dad do, or?
He worked at Plymouth Automobile Company.
Okay.
Building cars.
Very good. So you were living in Detroit then when World War II broke out?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. And do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor? I know that some people remember what they were doing or how they heard about that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I was working for Kresge's store at the time in Stockman, and that's when I heard about it. So I took voluntary induction. I went into service right away.
Okay. And how old were you at that time?
Well, I'd be about 17, 18.
Okay. And so you decided, World War II breaks out, and you decided to do voluntary induction, which means you volunteered to go and serve.
Yeah, instead of waiting the 30 days, you go in right away if you want to.
Okay. And you did that. Now, there were different branches of the military. Mm-hmm. I think a large number of people went into the Army. I know my uncles wound up in the Army in World War II. That was a common one. How did you wind up in this different branch of the service? Tell us what happened.
Well, I got sort of a guy who was sort of irritating to me, and he asked me, what do you want, the Army or Navy? I looked at him and said, I don't want either one. I'll take the Marine Corps.
Okay, so you were just kind of being a contrarian, huh?
That is correct, yeah.
That's right. If he had said, do you want the Marines or the Navy, you would have said, oh, I'm going in the Army.
Yeah,
you were going to do something different.
That is correct.
So you entered the Marines. Mm-hmm. And right from Detroit then, where did you go for training?
San Diego, California.
Okay.
Marine Corps base in San Diego.
Do you recall at all how long your training was?
13 weeks, I believe.
Okay. All right. And what happened after your training? What was your next step after that?
And I went to Camp Pendleton for more advanced training.
Okay. And that was in California as well, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was the next step?
Believe it or not, I went to a Navy prison.
Now, were you an inmate in the prison? Did you get in trouble?
No.
No. Okay. I didn't know. I hadn't heard this before. So
I was a Marine Guard.
Okay.
That's where all the bad boys went.
Okay. And so you were a guard at a military prison.
Right.
Okay. And did you think at that point, were you thinking that's where I'm going to, do my service for the war, that I'll probably be a guard here the whole time, or?
I don't know.
Just didn't know. Okay.
Just didn't know.
What happened next?
And then I got orders to go to Mare Island, where aboard the USS Indianapolis.
Okay. So Mare Island is up by San Francisco. Yep. So Mare Island, and this was in 1945 at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have, coincidentally, we have a couple of flags here. I think this one flag that's over here in the corner over the organ, and then this flag that's folded up here. Both of those flags are World War II era flags with the 48 stars. Both of those flags were made at Mare Island.
Oh.
So right there at Mare Island where you were stationed.
Mm-hmm.
So the USS Indianapolis, battleship. Had you been on a ship before?
Heavy cruiser.
A heavy cruiser, okay. Had you been on a ship before?
Nope, I didn't know starboard from port.
Okay, all right. So here you get put on this heavy cruiser. This is your new position. Now, it's a cruiser. It's the Navy. Why were you as a Marine going on this?
Well, most heavy cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers have a Marine detachment aboard. And more or less like we were flagship of the Fifth Fleet and Admiral Spoones was aboard. But more or less you'd call it the police of the ship.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the USS Indianapolis was the flagship for the Fifth Fleet.
Yep.
And before you came on to the USS Indianapolis, just as a matter of history, the Indianapolis had been in multiple battles. In fact, I think in total earned 10 battle stars.
That's true, yeah.
And then on March 31st of 1945, in the Battle of Okinawa, it was hit by a kamikaze plane.
Yep.
Did not sink, but sustained significant damage and limped its way back across the Pacific. Took several weeks and came into San Francisco to Mare Island for repairs. And that's where it was when you got assigned to it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember the first time seeing the ship, getting on the ship? Remember anything about that?
That was one big boat.
You know, I've only seen pictures, but I hear that it just was huge.
It was huge.
Yep. Something like, I don't remember, like 13 stories out of the water or something like that, 130 feet.
Yeah, it was big, yeah.
Yep, and several hundred feet long.
Mm-hmm.
So you got assigned to the Indianapolis. The Indianapolis was there being repaired, and in fact, in July of 1945, mid-July, it was expected that it would still be there for its repairs for another month or so. It was going to take them. But some orders came through, and the captain of the Indianapolis, and who was the captain of the Indianapolis?
McVeigh.
McVeigh. So Captain McVeigh got orders that he was supposed to get ready to move this ship out.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing more specific. Do you remember, were you on the ship or were you on leave at that time? Or
No, I was on the ship.
you were on the ship?
Yeah, but everybody got called back from leave.
Yep.
And we were out. We knew something was important, but we didn't know what.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And as I understand, there were hundreds of sailors and then some of the Marine detachment as well who were visiting family across the United States. They all received orders to get back right away.
Yep.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So everybody got back on the ship. Captain McVeigh, as I understand it at that time, really didn't have much in the way of specifics. Do you remember what happened with the ship next?
Yeah, we went to Hunters Point in San Francisco.
So a little bit away from Mare Island,
mm-hmm.
not very far, 20 miles or so. A little bit, went to Hunters Point. And what happened at Hunters Point?
Well, then a big Army caravan came up, and a lot of brass, and they had a big crate, and they lifted. See, we had 4 airplanes aboard that we could shoot off, and then a big crane would pick them out of the water, put them back on the ship.
Okay.
Yeah, and this crane went out, picked this big box up, put it in put it in the port hangar.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard that before about the airplanes. And so you could shoot the airplanes off the ship. They could do reconnaissance or whatever they were doing. Mm-hmm. Then they'd land in the water.
Yep.
And the crane would pick them up and put them on?
Put them back on the catapult, yeah.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. But at Hunter's Point, it wasn't a plane they were putting on, it was this big crate.
Right.
And I assume that everybody was told what the crate was and what you were doing?
Yep.
And what did they say the crate was?
We thought it was sending toilet paper for General MacArthur.
You knew it had to be something important.
It had to be important.
Well, at that point in the war, I think if General MacArthur wanted scented toilet paper, he would have had 1,196 men called back to bring it to him. But
Yep.
so you were all making guesses as to what was in that crate.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, but nobody really knew.
No.
And in fact, as we found out, Captain McVeigh didn't even know.
No.
Yep.
In fact, we went out in the harbor and waited because they were testing the atomic bomb in Nevada.
Okay.
And as soon as it was tested and approved, out we went underneath the Golden Gate Bridge.
So this crate was loaded on, the ship moves out to sea but stops.
Right.
And just sits there. And nobody knows why.
No.
And that's when the Trinity test was being done in New Mexico.
Oh.
And they were waiting, as you just said, to see if indeed this atomic bomb that was being tested would work. And all of a sudden the orders came through. You're floating around out there, and all of a sudden the ship starts to move, or you get an announcement you're moving. Did they tell you what you were doing at that point, or where you were going?
Nope.
Okay.
No, we didn't know nothing.
Didn't know nothing. Yeah. I think there's maybe some people in the military even today who might say they often don't know what's happening, right?
That's
they
true.
just take the orders.
Right.
All right. So you left San Francisco, and where did you head at that point?
Well, we wound up at Pearl Harbor
Okay.
just to get food and supplies and fuel. And then out we went again.
Okay.
And a lot of times ships will stay in Pearl Harbor for 2 or 3 days, But no, out we went again, so we knew we had something important.
Okay. So you didn't even did you get Liberty?
Nope.
Get off the ship at Pearl Harbor?
Some of the higher ones did, but not us.
No, you got to sit on the ship, and in fact you were only there for a few hours, as I understand it.
Yeah, right. Just
Okay.
enough to get supplies and fuel, and well, we went.
And you were telling me something about that crossing from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor, the speed of that crossing.
Well, we got to Tinian in 9 days. It's a record that still stands today. No ship has beaten that record.
Yep, that crossing.
Yeah.
So that crossing from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor, fastest ever, and you were on a cruiser, as you had mentioned, and a cruiser was meant for moving along quickly.
Oh yeah, we could go do a good 30 knots.
Yep. And so you made it to Pearl Harbor, and then you went on to the island of Tinian in the South Pacific.
Right.
And fastest crossing still stands to this day after all these years. There's not been a need for anybody to go any faster. I'm not an expert, but I'm guessing some of the ships might be able to go faster now. I don't know.
I think so too.
But your cruiser did it in that time. So you got to Tinian, and what happened at that point?
That's where we unloaded the atomic bomb and turned it over to the Air Force, where they put it on Enola Gay.
Okay. And at that point, did you know it was the bomb?
Nope.
Nope.
Nobody.
Didn't have any idea. You figured the toilet paper was unloaded.
Yep.
All right. So MacArthur could be happy on Tinian then.
Right.
All right. Excellent. So you unloaded your crate. There was that big crate, and then there was the small crate of the fission material.
Right, yeah.
And they unloaded that small crate. That little crate was half of the fissionable material that the United States had. And this was the material for Little Boy, one of the 2 bombs that was dropped. There was Fat Man and Little Boy. And the material that your ship brought was the material for Little Boy, which was the bomb, as you mentioned, that was loaded onto the Enola Gay and later dropped on Hiroshima. But you didn't know anything about that.
Nope.
So you unloaded your crate at Tinian, and then what happened?
But then we went to Guam.
Okay.
Then we went, fleet headquarters. Then the captain got his orders. We were supposed to go to rejoin, I think it was the 7th Fleet.
Okay.
For target practice, get ready for the landing in Japan.
And so really the whole Pacific Fleet at that point was getting ready for the invasion of mainland Japan.
Yep.
And you were headed off to practice for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was life like on the ship, during those? So now you had left San Francisco on July 16th of 1945, and about 9 days later into Tinian, then back to Guam. And you were in Guam, I think, on the 28th of July. During your time on ship, what did you do? What were your days as a Marine like?
Oh, just practice, some 40-millimeter guns. I was the first loader. Well, there's 5 or 6 different loaders, because the ammunition is below the ship, and it gets passed up to the first loader who drops it into the gun.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And as a Marine, the Marines were assigned to be those who ran the different guns, the 20 millimeter, the 40 millimeter, the larger guns as well?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your gun that you were assigned to was the 40 millimeter?
Mm-hmm.
So you do that practice. Mm-hmm. Did you practice for 4 hours a day and then have the other 20 off?
You wish.
Okay, 8 hours a day then.
No, now you wish.
How did your schedule work? How did the schedule work on the Indianapolis?
4 on, 4 off.
Okay.
That's what, right around the clock. 4 on, 4 off.
I wonder how many people here like a good 8 hours sleep at night? How many people like a good 10 hours sleep at night? Okay. Yeah. So it was 4 hours on, 4 hours off.
Yep.
And when you were on, you had practice for your job in manning the 40 millimeter gun. You also, I think, a couple of cooks had gotten in a little trouble before leaving in San Francisco. They made it back to the ship, but I think they got sent to the brig. So who took care of the brig?
I did.
You did. So you were one of the guards in the brig. The Marines guarded the brig, right?
Right. 4 on and 4 off.
4 on and 4 off. So you had to sit there. I found it interesting. I was reading. I don't know how true it was, but I was reading that at that point in time and on the Indianapolis, when they were in the brig, their rations was supposed to be bread and water. They weren't supposed to get other things. But I don't know if this is true, I read that some of the Marine detachment would let the fellow sailors come in and sneak them food. Now, do you remember allowing them to be snuck food, Mel?
No.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering. So your days were busy.
Yep.
You left Guam. And at this point, you're heading to Leyte, another island in the South Pacific, a couple days cruise away from Guam. Mm-hmm. And this isn't at the front edge of what was happening as far as engagements with the enemy. But Captain McVeigh, the captain of the Indianapolis, asked for an escort, which wasn't unusual because a cruiser isn't a battleship. Mm-hmm. And they would have escorts to bring them through hostile waters. And so, did you get that escort out of Guam?
Nope, no escort.
Just got sent on to the next stop.
Right.
Leyte. So, a cruiser has, commonly a cruiser has 3 to 4 inches of armored plating, whereas a battleship might be 13, 14 inches. They can sustain a whole lot more. Yeah. But you were just sent on, and the thinking was, we're in a relatively safe area. We're not going to use up any ships. The Indianapolis will make it fine. Mm-hmm. And so you left on I'm trying to recall, the 28th or 29th of July. I know you left Guam and headed out. And the 29th of July was a Sunday. And I had asked you... I know we were talking with some of the boys who came to visit you yesterday in honor of Veterans Day, and we were talking about that Sunday. And I asked you if you remembered anything special about that day. I know they had services on the ship. There was a priest on the ship who held a Catholic service on Sunday morning, and then right after the Catholic service was done, all those personnel who had gone to that service, they went and manned the stations, and the Protestants could go. Mm-hmm. And it was Dr. Haynes, the ship's physician, who ran the Protestant service, because they didn't have a Protestant minister. He ran the service on that Sunday. On that Sunday, there was a movie that was shown there, special meal, different things. But as I talked to you, it kind of seemed like a normal day to you, as I recall.
Yep, just a normal day.
Normal day.
4 on and 4 off.
All right, just continuing that same old thing. I like that. The days go by.
Yes, they
You don't
do.
know what part of the day you're in, but...
Right.
You know, one thing we didn't talk about, you mentioned it was a flagship, and you had told me this some years ago, but the USS Indianapolis had been the flagship for the head of state for, you had told me, I think, President Roosevelt, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So President Roosevelt had used the Indianapolis as his flagship as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an honored ship, a storied ship.
Yep, it was, yeah. A lot of history.
Tell me then on that 29th, you had your 4 on and 4 off on Sunday the 29th, and I think you were on from that 8 p.m. to midnight time period.
Yep.
And what happened around midnight?
Before midnight, Giles McCoy, another Marine, relieved me from duty, and I went up on the forecastle going to look for a place to sleep.
So you had been manning the brig, Giles McCoy came a little before midnight.
Right, yeah.
Said you can go, and the Marine had their own barracks kind of down below there to sleep in, but you
Right.
didn't go to sleep there. How come?
Too hot.
Too hot.
No, in the South Pacific, it gets hot, and it's so nice to sleep up on deck.
Okay.
You can look at the stars and stuff.
And had you been sleeping on deck frequently during this couple of weeks of travel?
Yeah.
And where would you sleep? Were there cots on deck, or what would happen?
No, you're going to find a place to put your blanket down and just try and go to sleep.
Snuggle up to that crate of toilet paper, and
Yeah.
that's good. And so at midnight, or a little before midnight, on Sunday, July 29th of 45, you went up on deck instead of going to the Marine barracks.
Right.
There were some Marines that were sleeping in the barracks,
Yeah.
some of your group.
Yeah. Marine, not barracks, they were, Marine compartment.
Your
anyway.
compartment, okay.
Which was right over the engine room, which was noisy.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many Marines were on the ship?
39.
39 Marines.
Yep.
And then the rest of the 1,196, the rest were all in the Navy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you headed upstairs instead of going down below. Did you take your life jacket with you?
Nope.
How come?
Who knows? Carry that thing around as a nuisance.
So everybody was supposed to always have a life jacket with them, right? But it wasn't commonly.
No.
Yeah. So you headed up, went to find your spot. Midnight passes. Now we're on the early morning, Monday morning, just after midnight, about 12:05. And do you remember what happened at that point?
That's when the first torpedo hit, right opposite on where I was sleeping. Yeah, I remember that. Picked me up, knocked me against the railing, but I got by barely. I had one little piece of shrapnel in the leg and a bad cut right here
Okay.
in my chin. So I went to the Marine Corps compartment, but that was all burnt out. The flames just burnt the whole Marine Corps compartment out. And then I went up on deck and went to the gun station where I ran into our lieutenant. And he says, this thing is going to tip over because we were listing so much, to starboard. And we were up here on the port side. We slid down on our butts, grabbed a hold of some railing so we wouldn't go over the side. But he says, this thing is going to go over. So he jumped, and I jumped in right after him.
Okay.
But that was the last time I saw him.
Last time you saw your lieutenant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At that point, when that first torpedo hit, did you know it was a torpedo? Did you?
Nope.
Just something happened and the ship was not looking good.
Not looking good.
Did you feel the second torpedo hit?
I don't recall it. It probably did, but there's so much going on, at the time.
Yeah.
So much confusion and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So right after that first torpedo hit, the second torpedo hit, and it was two that hit the Indianapolis. And because one of them hit in the bow of the ship and took off such a huge section of the ship,
Yep.
The ship was cruising along, I think, at about 13 knots at that point,
Yeah.
and was moving forward. And so what happened is the ship just wound up being a scoop.
Yeah.
It just kept plowing through the water, filling up the entire ship with water. Even as that second torpedo hit, caused another hole in the fires and the loss of life, and filled up very quickly. Do you recall how long it was until the Indianapolis sank?
No.
Do you recall you got off, you're in the water? Did you see other people right away? I know you lost track of your lieutenant, but
Yeah.
what happened then?
But then the ship went down head first. And I look up there, you can see those 4 big props in the ship
Sticking up in the air.
sticking up in the air.
Yeah.
And pretty soon then, nothing. What am I doing out here?
You're just floating.
Just floating, yeah.
And had you found a life jacket at that point?
Not right away, but there's so many stuff was blown off the ship. There was cans and stuff that we could hold on to. But I finally found one later in the water. We had a double shipment of life preservers. They got blown off. So we did have plenty of life preservers because we had a double order.
Okay.
And I got a hold of one of them and I laid across it. I didn't put it on. I just laid across it on my stomach, my chest. Then I could kick with my feet and just go around in the water wherever I wanted to go.
Okay. So the Indianapolis had actually, of course, no one on the ship, or now that was in the water, knew exactly what had happened, but there was a Japanese submarine who actually had not sunk any ships during the war. And now, 2 weeks before the war was to end, it happened to come across the Indianapolis, and it fired a spray of 6 torpedoes.
Right.
Then 2 of them hit the Indianapolis. The ship sunk in 12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Amazingly fast.
Amazingly fast, yeah.
There were 1,196 men on board, and it's estimated that of the 1,196, approximately 300 were killed in the explosions, the torpedoes. About 900, it's estimated, wound up alive in the water, many of them terribly injured. And that's where you were at this point, 1945, Monday morning, July 30th, floating.
Yeah.
Did you wind up meeting up with some folks at night? Did you find other people in the water? What happened?
We finally getting in the groups, but we took all the wounded, the ones that really badly burnt, and put them on the life preservers. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had a double shipment of life jackets. So in that rush to get out of San Francisco, the Indianapolis got twice as many life preservers, 2,500 were shipped to it that they loaded on, but what it didn't get were all the provisions for the life rafts that it was supposed to get. All of the containers with food and water and the other provisions, they never got put on. Remember, the Indianapolis was rushed out a good month before it was anticipated.
Right.
So you had a group, you had the wounded up on the life raft. Were you on a life raft or in the water? Or?
I was in the water.
Okay. The next morning comes, sun comes up. What are you thinking at that point? Are you thinking, well, we'll be rescued here this afternoon, or?
That's what I thought.
Okay.
We're doing port the next day. We were doing port. We reported overdue, but we weren't reported overdue.
You weren't?
No.
Did you know why? Like, after you were rescued, did you find out why right away? Did you know why you weren't reported overdue?
I don't know. I think lately, I think they just seen Indianapolis do today. Raced it.
Yep. There had been an order that had gone out, we talked about once before, there had been an order that had gone out just a few months before that because of the amount of traffic that was going on in all the ships, the Navy decided, you know what, let's not report the arrival of combat ships. We know they're going to arrive, so they sent out an order, don't report the arrival, and many people took that to mean we won't report if a ship doesn't arrive either.
Yeah.
We'll just say, Indianapolis, arriving late, July 31st, it's July 31st, arrived. And so the Indianapolis name was just put in the arrived bucket.
Yep.
You were floating on that Monday. The sun came up. It's the Pacific. You mentioned how warm it was. Was it hot during the day? Was it hot at night? What was it like?
It was hot during the day, cold at night.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember mostly the sun. My God, you don't bring sunglasses on, you know. So, and that sun just dig in your eye, you just couldn't see nothing. Nothing to look at anyway. Yeah.
Just open water.
Open water.
Yep. This happened at 5 minutes after midnight. There were a lot of Marines and sailors in the water that weren't in a lot of clothes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Were you fully dressed at that time?
Well, I had my shorts on.
Okay, you had shorts. That's good.
But later I took them off to keep the sun off my eyes.
Put the shorts on your eyes. More
keep
important?
From getting sunburned and, yeah.
Yep.
That sun was awfully hot.
What was it like over the next couple of days?
Well, what are we going to do today? I don't know. It was just wait. Wondering, are we going to be picked up or not?
There were lots of men that were severely injured, a lot that were burned.
Yes, there were a lot.
You got those saltwater blisters that came soon thereafter from being in the salt water.
Yep.
You mentioned a couple of injuries that you had, shrapnel from the first explosion. Were you bleeding? Were you feeling okay at that point, or?
It was very minor.
Okay.
Band-aid stuff.
Okay. All right. The group, do you have any idea how large of a group you were in? Like how many men were in your group that was floating?
I wouldn't have the slightest idea. I know it was a pretty good-sized group.
Yeah.
But then we got word, too, that whenever a ship goes down, we get 30-day survival furlough.
Okay.
Yeah. That was not a weekend pass. I mean, this is 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah.
So did you start thinking about that 30 days you could get?
I sure did, yeah. I was thinking when I get back to Detroit, Michigan, there was a girl waiting for me, and I was planning all those 30 days out.
You knew what was going to happen in that furlough, huh?
Yes, I did.
All right. You thought about that. Now, the key was it was the survival furlough. You needed to survive.
Well, that's true, yeah.
So, but you started thinking about that, and did that kind of get you through the hours and the days somewhat?
I think so, because I was young at the time. I was only 18, But some of these older people, especially the married men, they had a lot to live for, Yeah. Even when I went aboard the Indianapolis, I mean, most of the men were married.
Okay.
I think there was only 3 that I can think of that were single.
That you knew yourself?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're thinking about that survival furlough to kind of get you through it. Mm-hmm. As time went by, dehydration sets in for a lot of the men, the burns, the injuries, the blood loss, and so on. There were sailors and Marines who had survived the initial torpedo attack, but that were dying at that point. Any in your group that you...
Oh, yeah, they would tie 40-millimeter cans to their feet. And around the life raft, there's a lot of rope, and they would cut them off and tie it to their feet, try to sink the body so the sharks wouldn't get them.
So when somebody would die, they'd try to sink that person quickly, a burial at sea. And you mentioned so the sharks wouldn't get them. I know somewhat on Monday, a little bit Monday evening, but especially Tuesday morning at dawn, with many of the groups that were there, large schools of sharks started coming in. You did not get injured by a shark. You did tell me, though, you did see a shark at one point, kind of an interesting one. What shark did you see?
A whale shark.
A whale shark.
And the fourth day I saw a whale shark. They're like a miniature submarine. But, he could have swallowed me whole. I mean, he was humongous.
Yep. Those whale sharks are happily. He was not one who was going to eat people. We're happy with the whale sharks. But many of the soldiers, many of the sailors and of the Marines unfortunately, were attacked by sharks. I know these are just estimates, but it's estimated that of the 900 that went in the water, between 200 and 300 died of shark attack. And you mentioned to me, I know yesterday as well when we were talking, you mentioned that sometimes you would hear the men.
That was the worst part, is to hear them scream when they get attacked by a shark. That was bad.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do nothing to help them.
You're all trying to hang on yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And another thing began to happen, I know, is that with that thirst, you start to have delusions.
Yep.
Many of the men did begin to drink salt water.
Yep.
And because, boy, when you're thirsty like that, eventually you might end up giving in, and some of the men would drink salt water. And do you recall what would happen with them?
They would just go right out of their head, right out of their mind.
Yeah.
They'd see things that are not there. They'd see a ship out in the distance and take off their life jacket and start swimming towards it. But they wouldn't get too far.
And they'd be gone.
They'd be gone.
Yeah.
You couldn't do nothing to help them.
There were men at that point who looked down below in that clear ocean water and were convinced that the Indianapolis was just below you.
Right, yeah.
And if they could just swim down there, I know some of them said in some of the groups, they said, boy, you just have to swim down there and you can get a drink. The water's crystal clear on our ship. It's just below us. Yeah.
And there were so many cases like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. See an island or think about swimming to an island and take off their life jacket and away they'd go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that Monday went by, Monday the 30th, then Tuesday the 31st, then Wednesday the 1st.
Yep.
No rescues coming.
Nope.
Captain McVeigh is actually in a small group himself, and at this point he's confused as to why there's no rescue.
Right.
They did not feel that they had gotten off a distress signal because the main radio room had been destroyed immediately by a torpedo, and they weren't sure it got out of the secondary radio room. But they figured for sure that as soon as you didn't arrive in Leyte that you would wind up, they'd send out somebody to find you, and that didn't happen. Now you are all the way on Thursday. It's the fourth day in the water. Some planes have flown way high overhead and nobody's seen. Do you remember what happened? What happened on Thursday? When was the first thing that anything was different that you knew? Because at this point we should maybe mention the men that are in the water aren't all together.
No.
They're scattered over 100 miles from the point where the ship had sunk.
Yeah.
And they're scattered 20, 30 miles apart in different groups, some individually. So everybody was experiencing different things.
But as the ship was moving forward, too, people were jumping off as the ship was going. And it was scattered all over the place, yeah.
Right from the beginning. So on that Thursday, do you recall an airplane or hearing about rescue or anything at all?
No. I know a PBY landed in the water. That was, what's his name?
Adrian Marks.
Adrian Marks,
Yep.
yeah. And he was told not to land in the water, but he did. And he taxied around and picked up stray ones, put them up on the wings, get them out of the water.
Yep.
And I forgot how many he picked up, but there was quite a few.
Yeah. So on that day, on that Thursday morning, there had been a Lockheed Ventura bomber that had left, and we had talked about that one. Remember, that was Gwynn that was in charge, the captain of that one, and they had been having problems with their radar, and so they had their bomb doors open, and about 2 hours into the flight, he was still trying to fix that long-range radar, that antenna. That was it.
That long antenna.
Yep.
They let an antenna out so they can communicate farther.
And so Gwynn left the cockpit and he came back to try to fix that. And looking down, saw this sheen on the ocean surface and thought, hey, maybe we've got a wounded Japanese sub, because he was out there looking for subs to sink. And they came down lower and started to see men in the water.
Yeah.
not knowing who they were because there were no missing U.S. ships.
Right, because weren't we before they're overdue?
Yep. And so that's when the call went out. People still weren't sure who was in the water, but that Adrian Marks came in his PBY, the float plane, and saw what was happening. Saw on that afternoon, that Thursday afternoon, the groups of men, and saw what they counted as literally hundreds of sharks around different groups of men as he surveyed the place. And then, as it got closer into evening, began to see the shark attack start again. And he made the decision against orders to land, as you mentioned. And he landed, and before nightfall picked up 56 people. But you were not one of those.
Nope.
You were still in the water.
Still in the water.
Now night comes. Do you remember seeing a light at some point in time?
Well, that was the Doyle. Yeah, they got ships coming from every which direction. But the Doyle, in enemy waters yet, put a spotlight on the clouds. Then he had another one sweeping the horizon to let us know that help was on the way. That was nice.
So the Doyle putting his ship at risk.
Right.
To give you some hope.
Right.
Yep.
Help is coming.
Yep. The captain of the Doyle was another one. I'm not suggesting that everyone should break orders, but the captain of the Doyle, when he heard of what was happening, before he was ordered to go, he turned his ship around and headed to the spot that had been marked by Gwyn on that Lockheed Ventura previously, and was one of the first ships to arrive. But it was night and they couldn't see where people were.
Yeah.
So it's that Thursday night. There's some ships now arriving. You see those lights. There's some hope. What happened with you and your group?
Well, I got picked up by the USS Bassett. They had landing barges. They go taxiing around in the water, picking people up. They had a ladder that would go up to the top of the landing barge. And I got up close to it, and I got a hold of the end of that rope. And I said, I'm going to hold on to this rope. Pull me to San Diego, not letting go of this rope.
You weren't leaving that rope.
I wasn't leaving that rope. But then a couple of sailors leaned over the side and picked me up by my wrist and put me up on deck and set me down. Of course, I passed right out. Rope up on the bunk of inside the ship, yeah. That was nice.
Did it sink in at that point? I guess sink in is not a good term for me to use, but did you realize at that point when you woke up that it wasn't a dream? I mean, did you know, hey, I'm okay?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of us was covered with fuel oil. And it took us into a place to wash all the fuel oil off. Yeah, the big sign is no smoking. Anyway, they washed all the fuel oil off. But they really went over backwards. They gave us clothes, their own clothes. I mean, not, and fed us, you know, and they really treated us nice and took us to the island of Samar.
Yep.
Took us to a hospital 114. And this was a brand new hospital. It was built especially for the landing on Japan. Yep.
Okay.
And they knew there was going to be a lot of casualties if we had to land on Japan. So they built this hospital just for that, from what I hear, yeah.
Yep. And at this point now, it is Friday, and the rescue effort went on actually for several days because men were scattered over just mile after mile. But by that Saturday, they weren't finding any more survivors. They were retrieving some of the men who had died and were still able to be found.
Yeah, they covered an area, I don't know, was it 500 square miles or something?
Yeah.
Just swept it right around to pick up all the dead bodies and survivors and make sure they didn't leave somebody out there.
Yeah. And you had mentioned one of your Marine buddies, Giles McCoy, who had relieved you. Giles McCoy was in the last group. I think there was four in his group. The last group that was pulled out of the water on that Friday. They kept searching but did not find anybody else alive at that point. You guys were sent to hospitals. Of 1,196 men on the ship, 900 who went in the water, 321 were taken out of the water alive. 4 of those died within the first week from their injuries, and that's where we get the 317 original survivors of the USS Indianapolis. They kind of kept it quiet, didn't they?
Yep.
Did you come home to lots of fanfare, heroes surviving such a thing?
Sure.
You're laughing at me.
No, but I wrote home, told them all about it. They wouldn't let the letters go out. They all came back. They did not want to know that the Indianapolis was sunk.
They kept
it quiet.
Yep. There was a fair amount of embarrassment and finger pointing and uncertainty as to why it had happened. And of course you had been on a significant mission because now you're on that Friday. So it had been the 30th that Monday morning. Then it was the 3rd on Friday. The last of the survivors were taken out. 4th and 5th, Saturday and Sunday, you guys are in hospitals now. On Monday, the 6th of August, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian and dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, there was a second bomb dropped. And the day after that, Japan sued for peace and wound up surrendering. And at the time that all the newspapers in the United States put Japan surrenders, then what did the U.S. Navy release?
The Indianapolis was sunk.
Yep.
They waited till the war was over, then released it. Now everybody's thinking about the war ending. Ours was just a small article, you know.
Yep. The worst naval disaster at sea was relegated to 8th page in some places.
Yeah.
After that, tell me, I know you came back to San Diego with the end of the war and all the higher-ups getting transported from place to place. Did they put you 317 survivors on the best planes and get you back to the U.S. as quickly as possible?
No, put us on an old aircraft carrier.
And you crept back to the West Coast.
That's for sure.
Yep.
We see sailboats out there. Oh, good, they're going to tow us in.
That's good. So you made it back. Did you get that 30-day survivor furlough?
Yep. Unfortunately, the girl I was thinking about, she married somebody else. Which is okay.
Tell me, did you ever meet anybody else to replace that girl?
Oh, you bet I did.
You did?
Right here in Madison.
Yes. So you wound up, remember you were, as we talked about, you were born in Manitowoc, moved to Detroit, but your dad opened a business right on East Washington. What was his business?
Jacob Mobile Homes.
Jacob Mobile Homes, and you came to help him out.
Right. Well, first I went down to Florida, and we have it at, what was that, $21 a month deal, and so I went different places and worked.
Okay.
Well, I went back to, make a long story short, I wound up at it's a Marine Corps base in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune.
Lejeune.
Yeah. Then I went from there to Marine Corps headquarters, and I was stationed there. But we didn't have barracks. We lived outside, and they paid us for living outside. The only time we had to wear uniforms was when we went on duty.
Oh, okay.
I worked in the War Bond Division, 1875, 1875, 1875.
Sort of like that 4 on, 4 off.
Yeah. That's how much a war bond costs, 1875.
So you came back here to Madison, and you married, and did you have any children?
Yep. Boy in Dallas, Texas, and the daughter in Columbus, Wisconsin.
Very good. And you worked at your family business, but you also had a couple other jobs over the years, kind of long-term jobs. Where did you go to work?
Four Lakes Aviation. I was the chief flight instructor there for 32 years. And I worked 22 years as an FAA examiner, giving flight tests for private, commercial, instrument, and multi-engine.
So all those years being a flight instructor right here in Madison. You also worked, I know, at Oscar Mayer for a while while you were also doing flight work. So for a long time there as well. And I know you developed lots of great friendships over the years. We just talked, a gentleman called this morning who saw that you were doing this talk, and he called this morning. He's also a veteran, 81 years old, and hasn't seen you in years. And you guys are going to get back together now.
Yep.
So there's some good reasons to come out and chat once in a while.
Yeah.
So that's good. Well, you know, every veteran has a story, whether it's peacetime or wartime, and one isn't more important than the other. Yours is very unique, Mel. And of those 317 men who were the original survivors, as of this July, back at the Indianapolis reunion, because you do have a survivors reunion, there were 23 survivors still alive, and I think a good number of you were at the reunion this year, right?
Yeah, 13, I believe it was.
13 of the 23 were at the reunion this year.
Yeah, but there was about, I would say 500 people, you know, that survivors that lost their sweethearts and husbands when the Indianapolis went down.
Yeah. I think it's, I just want to say thank you so much for coming, for sharing your story, for reminding us of people who've served to keep our country free and safe, and to help other countries and people around the world. And there's so many more things I'd like to ask about. You know, we didn't even get into the subsequent discipline, what happened with Captain McVeigh, inappropriately so to many and to most, and in fact now to the U.S. government, because he was finally exonerated after his death. We could get into that story. I know we've talked about it before, but I think if it's okay with you, Mel, could we maybe ask? I know we have a big group, and I've probably taken too much of your time, but could we see if there's any questions from anybody? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay. If you have a question for Mel, if you would just raise your hand, and we have a young man who's going to come around, and he has a microphone, and you can ask any question you want. I don't know if you'll answer any question, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you have any question, if you would.
Thank you.
Did they give you any promotion after all this?
Did you get any promotion? You were a private first class in the Marine Corps at that point of the sinking. Did you get a promotion?
Yeah, all the way up to corporal.
Was it worth it?
No.
My question is, what got you through those days when you were out there? Maybe you talked about it earlier, but what was it that got you through that time?
What got you through that time in the water?
Well, mostly that 30-day furlough was the most. Yeah.
Thinking about that furlough.
Right.
Did you guys, as a group, did you, this may sound, but did you tell stories about home? Did you play any games? Did you?
No, we were basically all by ourselves.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody was close to you, maybe you talk a little bit, but most of it was just trying to hold on.
Hanging on.
Hanging on, yeah.
Find out what your cargo was, what the Indianapolis was delivering, that caused you to be sunk with them.
That was after the bomb was first dropped. Then they released it. That was the Indianapolis that took the bomb to Kenyon.
Put your life jacket on fully, and did you sleep at all? And what kind of emotions were you having when you were in the water? You know, what kind of things were running through your mind?
Did you ever get that life jacket all the way on you? We know in the beginning you
No.
were floating on it. You floated the whole time.
Yeah, I floated all the time. Never
Okay.
did get it on.
And what were your emotions like? I mean, were you scared? Were you sad? Were you crying?
I was curious. What's going to happen next? I mean, this was an adventure. I mean, I was only 18 years old. What's going to happen next? You know, it was always that, I don't know, I wouldn't say fear of the unknown, but curious of the unknown.
Sure.
Are we going to get picked up or what?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did you sleep at all, Mel?
You know, it's one thing about that sleep. I don't ever remember going to sleep. I had to. Maybe somebody held my head up or something, but I don't ever remember going to sleep.
I know that's a common for many of the survivors. They say they have no recollection of sleeping.
Yeah.
You probably did at some point. I know, Mel, at one point you were holding a sailor.
Oh, yeah.
You were, holding each other. Do you remember that time you were holding a sailor and somebody else came around, and what did they tell you?
I don't have to hold him anymore. Yeah, he's gone.
Yep. But you were still hanging on.
Still hanging on.
Any other questions before we end with Mel here?
Did you ever feel like going swimming anymore after that?
Did you ever want to go swimming anymore, Mel?
Never been in the water.
Have you, since that time, really? Never been in the water?
Oh, in the swimming pool, but that's it.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Anyone else? Well, again, Mel, I want to thank you for coming tonight. I think maybe we'll give you a round of applause, and then we have a few more things to do before we're done.
Okay.